historic signing, a long-awaited signing. Welcome home to Ron Shelton.
Amen.
So Santa Barbara High alum, Westmont College alum, Hollywood, now here. So how does it feel to be back home? You're seeing some friends right now?
The amazing thing, and I didn't realize it until driving up, that when my parents moved to Santa Barbara, to go to college at Santa Barbara State, originally on the GI Bill, which and then ultimately Westmont, we lived at Hoff Heights. Now Hoff Heights was 50 acres of dirt with army barracks for post-war housing, and it was right where the golf course is. That was almost a slum kind of thing, and I went to kindergarten at Peabody.
Wow.
And then 65 years later, then the family moved out to Cold Spring, where everybody still is for the most part. And then our beloved father, when he passed away, he was in a nursing home right out here in State. My brothers were with him, all of us, and once he passed, we came to Harry's and started drinking. So this is a full circle.
I think you understated your father, Ralph. He was just the most wonderful, wonderful man, as many of you can attest. And he was a great presence. My Uncle Caesar Osaka, whose son Paul, my cousin, is here. Just a great driving force for the community. But I mean, this being Shelton Brothers 2.0, because we had Jeff in here a few months ago, and Steve is next, and Dave, I think, would be after that. Just being part of that family, I wanted to know what it was like. You know, they opined on it, but I wanted to hear your impression of being part of the Shelton family.
Well, as the oldest of three younger brothers, my job was to rein them in and wrangle them. You know, the oldest brother thing. Nobody was self-consciously trying to be creative in the arts. We just, whatever we did, our parents kind of, you know, said, go for it. And, I mean, nobody's doing what they started out doing, probably, and, except Jeff.
Yeah.
So it was a very open family, especially interesting given our evangelical background, which is a big part of the early chapters of the book, because there are things that the family believed in that would seem to be incompatible today. And but I was lucky to be part of it when it was compatible.
And it all came down to, I mean, you made Bull Durham 36 years, 35, 36
34
years,
years ago.
34 years ago, which incidentally was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay. Congratulations, it's huge. You follow that up with Best of Times. Oh, that was before the Best of Times. Then there was Tin Cup, Cobb, White Men Can't Jump, Blaze, Play It to the Bone. All this from a guy who went to Santa Barbara High School, which I'm sure Santa Barbara's proud, we're all proud, but I'd like to know about your experience playing for the high school, and I think you met the greatest Don baseball player, Eddie Matthews, in the past.
I never met Eddie.
Okay.
I wanted to be Eddie Matthews. every little boy in Santa Barbara wanted to be Eddie Matthews. And that's why at the age of 8, we were all Milwaukee Brave fans. Every little kid in Santa Barbara was rooting for the Milwaukee Braves. And Eddie Matthews is actually all through the book.
He is.
And I'll read a little passage of how Eddie Matthews and my spiritual life. And as you know, Eddie was a bar-fighting alcoholic and probably never read a book in his life, but he was still my hero. And I learned a lot from him, and he helped liberate us. There was a spiritual liberation connected to Eddie Matthews that I'll read about in a bit.
So was there, when you were playing at Santa Barbara High, was there that specter of him? I mean, because it was relatively close during his career and after his career that you played at Santa Barbara High. Was there this shadow or this expectation while you were at Santa Barbara High?
Well, there was no expectation for me at Santa Barbara High. I was a little scrappy guy. No, Eddie was a bit larger than life. He'd hit balls in places that we could only stare at the age of 15 and 16. Eddie hit one on the swimming pool. Eddie did this, Eddie did that. But he was also doing it in the major leagues.
Yeah.
You know, the greatest two home run hitters on the team are Aaron and Matthews.
Yeah.
And not Ruth and Garrett. Hello? So, yeah, and he was mythic, and I remember a time that he got arrested for drunk driving in Milwaukee, and I was about 9, and we sat down at a dinner table, and my dad had to put that in perspective for us, that, you know, Eddie did something not so good today, but it's okay, we have to pray for him, and, but you could separate very quickly. It's still an issue that what you learn from a major league or a great athlete, you learn certain things from them, and you'd be crazy if you learned other things from them. There's something we can learn from almost everybody out there, and you know, we see the press jump on and judge character really quickly, and nobody really knows what's going on. So I had no problem separating Eddie the baseball player from Eddie the human being, and you know, I'm still writing about him. So
Yeah. So would you share something that you wrote about him in here? Would you mind? Because I know he's all over the book.
well, now that you know, we all wanted to be Eddie, and the other part of the background is, you know, we were good. My dad was from Taft, which is 37 miles from Bakersfield. If you've ever been to Taft, and he came from West Texas, so I mean, it is the most godforsaken place. Taft, Taftites want to be Bakersfield, and they would go. I remember at Christmas, everybody there'd be a trip, family trip, into Bakersfield to see the department store. That's what Taft is. And it's 140 in the summer, freezing in the winter. And anyway, so we grew up with this evangelical world. We went to church, the First Baptist Church at, what was it, Chapala, Victoria. And we never missed Sunday school or church. And we also didn't have a television until I was 12 years old. And the ritual of, there's now 3 little brothers, there's 3 of us, and my mother's pregnant, who would be the 4th, Jeff. And we were, and this was 1957, the year the Braves get into the World Series against the Yankees. And so we're there in our wool scratchy slacks and clip-on ties, trudging up from Sunday school to the sanctuary. And my dad whisks us up and he pushes us in the car. We're not going to go to church. This is unheard of. And we looked at my mother like, is this okay? And she kind of like, Jill, it's okay. Which meant she signed off on this, whatever it was. And we go home, and now I'm starting to get nervous because probably nobody grew up with this stuff, but do you know what the rapture is? In Sunday school, there were paintings of the rapture. That is, Jesus is coming down, the second coming, and the believers are floating up, and everybody else is in a car crash. The cars are on fire because us pagans are left. So I'm thinking, if the rapture comes, I haven't been baptized yet, and we may not go up there because we're skipping church for something. We don't know what. So something happened as startling as the events that overtook Saul of Tarsus on the road to Damascus. My father swept us boys up and rushed us to our big dented Buick station wagon. My mother, late in pregnancy, with what would be her 4th son, watched us go silently, which meant she had signed off on this intervention. Her will mattered and was respected by all of us, but something was afoot. My father raced us home nervously, saying nothing. We understood the gravity of the moment, didn't yet know the stakes. The rapture might be upon us, and we knew that meant all Christians would be lifted into the clouds and the pagans would be left behind, eternally damned. But given my father's sudden apostasy, Would our station wagon be lifted as well, or have we forfeited a life believing in Jesus for we didn't even know what? What if, God forbid, my father and mother were lifted up into the sky to meet Jesus, and my two little brothers and I, because we hadn't yet been baptized and received Reverend Gableman's warm hand of fellowship, what if we crashed in the driverless Buick? Maybe I could climb into the front seat and manage to slow the car down before it hit a light pole and save us from a terrible death. Maybe I'd just be postponing the inevitable because the rapture had passed us all over. These eschatological questions my father was wrestling with, and as the oldest son, I empathized and I sweated with him. Even if I didn't know the issues, I felt them. I felt him. My father, still silent, led us straight into the house where a man from Ott's department store, buy local, my parents taught, was just finishing installing a television set. Surely God would strike now. But he didn't. He strung us out, and when the TV was turned on and the black and white image came into focus, it was, we'd completely forgotten, given the spiritual crisis, the World Series. Game 4. The installer was a man, it's Johnny Osborne for any of you old timers. The installer was a man we knew. He had a brief minor league career that hadn't worked out, and now he was making do, and he understood the moment. He just said, "Eddie, I know," as he left. We watched the game in terror, aware that Eddie Matthews was having a terrible series. But after the team tied it in the bottom of the 10th, our hometown hero hit a towering 2-run homer to win the game. A great weight lifted up out of the room. My father looked around, his shoulders lightened, and we started going to church less and less. That's it.
I'm going to move away from you in case the lightning bolt comes down. Obviously, baseball had a great impression on you, where you went further than most people have done. You didn't quite make it there, but you had a minor league career, which is the basis of BULL Durham, of course, this wonderful book, The Church of Baseball. And I wanted to ask you about some of the certain influences. And you mentioned Joe Altobelli, who managed. He managed the Baltimore Orioles to the last World Series win in 1983, but this was before that. And also a guy named Steve Dalkowski, who was the basis of your character Nuclear Rouge. So if you can talk a little bit about first Joe and then Steve.
Well, let me talk about Steve because it's
okay.
It's better to read it. But when I was playing in the minors in Bakersfield, there's Bakersfield. You just can't get away from it. And, it's actually their ballpark's in Oildale. It's a suburb of Bakersfield, and it's the bad section of Bakersfield. And there was a guy lurking in the dark behind the bullpen, way down in the corner, and he had a flask and he had a heavy coat on, and it was 100 degrees at 8 o'clock at night. And later, after the game, he came up to Joe Altobelli, our manager. And we saw Joe doing something, give him something, maybe give him some money. Then a month later in Stockton, after a game, 11 o'clock at night, there's a knock at the door, somebody opens it, there's the clubhouse out in center field. And the same guy was standing there. Then Joe goes out and talks to him, gives him some more money. So when he came back, a bunch of us said, "Joe, who was that?" And he said, "That was Steve Dalkowski, the hardest thrower who ever lived." And the stories kept growing, continuing, and other people told stories. Veteran for the Orioles, Cal Ripken Sr. had been his catcher. Cal Ripken Jr. was my bat boy in winter ball.
Really?
And the legends of Steve Dalkowski from Connecticut, he was about 5'10", he was a little lefty, and according to everybody, nobody ever threw the ball as hard as he did, but he couldn't throw strikes. And the thing about his legend that I've talked about before is, most legends just get bigger and bigger. I had a home run at Westmont. Every time I go to that field, it's about 150 feet farther than I have to home. And I like that, so yeah, let the legend, print the legend, you know. But Dalco had the statistics. You know, averaged in his 10-year minor league career 13 strikeouts, 13 walks a game. That was his average. There was a game where he struck out 21, walked 21, and threw a complete game. He once had 260 pitches in the 4th inning. So, anyway, he threw, there was no radar guns, and they took him to the Aberdeen Proving Grounds outside of Baltimore, where they have those like wind tubes that you'd see at the track meets, right? And he was in his sneakers, no mound, and he threw for 40 minutes trying to throw one through there. And when we finally did it, was like 97 after 40 minutes with no mound and no cleats. Ted Williams said it batted against him one at bat, half an at bat in spring training. Said I won't get in against that guy. His legends go on and on and on, and the statistics are there to back it up, which is why we love him. He was an alcoholic, never could shake the bottle. After 10 years in the minors, a Double-A manager named Earl Weaver, on his way to the big league, said, "Quit throwing so hard. Throw 3/4." So he was throwing 3/4 at 100 miles an hour. So who knows what he threw. He finally gets to Triple-A. He's throwing strikes, and his manager, his roommate, is a career minor leaguer who'd had a cup of coffee in the big leagues named Joe Altobelli. And the management said, "Steve, you're going to room with Joe. Joe, you're going to mature this kid." And when I got to AAA, Joe was my manager. I'd kind of moved up with him. And all these stories come back, and I said, "Wait a minute, Joe, you were his roommate in AAA. What was that like?" And he said, "I don't know. I never saw him. I roomed with his suitcase." So many, many years later, when I want to tell a story of my life in the minors, not the specifics of Dalco and Joe, but the dynamic, the behavioral dynamic was Bull Durham.
You know, I have to add, because you won't add, that Ron had spoken for Steve in 2009 at the Baseball Reliquary, which is, it's kind of a alternative Hall of Fame based in Pasadena, wonderful work they do. And you did the opening speech for Steve, who also threw out the first pitch for the Dodgers. But it was a wonderful speech that you gave him.
Well, he'd been 15 years. He'd become a migrant worker in the fields. I talked to the police in Bakersfield when I did my first article about him, long before I wrote about him. Wrote a movie, and they said he had a police record 14 feet long because he couldn't get over the bottle. But the cops knew he wasn't harmful. They would always take him back to the apartment. He'd been lost for years. Nobody could find him, and his sister came out from Connecticut and just pounded the Central Valley until she found him and got him in a nursing home, and we brought him out to honor him.
So you're honoring him with Nuke Rahush,
Yeah.
I thought.
Nuke doesn't have the dark side of.
Yeah, he's more of a hayseed, innocent, and wonder where the other ideas came from. I know Fernando Valenzuela plays a big part, especially the way he rolls his eyes up when he pitches, when Nuke pitches, was just like Fernando did when he pitched.
There are so many Nuke Galushas in the minor leagues.
Yeah.
I can't tell you. People say, "Who is the hardest thrower you ever faced?" I will name 10 guys that nobody's heard of again because they hurt their arm or they just didn't have the brain and they couldn't throw strikes continuously. You know, they throw 300-mile fastball and then 4 over the screen, and so they're everywhere. The guys that throw hard but don't, $1 million arm, 5 cent head, that's
expression. And you actually pay tribute, I think. I'm not giving anything away in the book, that you actually went to the hole that he threw, and you climbed this fence or something like that.
I'll let you read that one.
Okay. Read by the book anyway. I don't want to give that up. How much of your own experience played a part in writing Bull Durham?
100%.
I mean, you're personal though.
Well, I lived that life, and from evangelical upbringing to being liberated by Eddie Matthews of all people, to playing high school, college, and having the dream of playing for several years. And I walked away. I didn't get released during the strike of '72, which led to the Kurt Flood. I mean, that was pre-Kurt Flood, and then baseball union was forming, and you know, it's not a glamorous life, but it's a great way. You know, it's fragile and it's thrilling at the same time. I mean, it's no better way to make a living, because guys are getting released, so you're always on edge. You're always performing. You know, you can't not show up. This is why when people don't show up, I just have zero. What do you mean? If game's at 7, you don't feel like playing. You have to play at 7 o'clock. You know, I don't get that. But along the way, I started going to movies, and there's a lot about that.
Well, what I really liked is not only the love story is great and the baseball scenes were fun, but what I really liked a lot about how you portrayed the life, the grind of baseball, and like your experiences. You had Bobby Grich breathing down your neck, playing the infield.
Let me read that
Yeah,
little
you wanna
bit.
talk about
What's
Bobby?
funny,
Yeah.
when I signed my contract at LAX, now keep in mind I grew up in Santa Barbara, and I'm on 3 flights on Piedmont Airlines to get to Bluefield, West Virginia, which is in the heart of the coal country. And I got there 7 in the morning. And they're out in front of the hotel. There's guys with black lung disease begging for money, and guys who've lost their limbs on carts. And I'm coming from Santa Barbara to this.
Yeah.
And the billboards are calling it America's air-conditioned city. It was the most oppressive air and humidity and darkness I've ever been to. And there's a very interesting story how in 24 hours I went from being a third baseman to the starting shortstop. I mean, a bit of luck and a bit of whatever. So I'm playing shortstop in Rookie League for the Orioles. And Joe is our manager. He's just starting out a career after, just like, guess what, Crash Davis will later do, giving up playing for this. And I'm hitting third, and I haven't made an error, and I'm just, our fourth hitter was a 18-year-old kid named Don Baylor, later MVP. We were loaded, and Joe called me in. When a manager calls you in, they're called skip, for skipper, or you call them first name or skip. When they call you in, they don't call you in to say anything good. It's usually pack your bags. So he calls me in, but I knew I wasn't being released because I was playing good. Joe says, "How you like to play second base?" Me. I'm really liking shortstop. Joe, the organization just signed their #1 pick out of Long Beach, California, a kid named Bobby Grich, and he's going to be their shortstop of the future. Me. Nah, Skip, he's got to beat me out. Joe, he already beat you. Me. Why? They gave him a lot of dough. How much they give you? Me. What about Jimmy Morrell, our second baseman? He's playing great. Joe takes another long drag of his camel. Let me put it to you like this, son. Do you want to play second base? Or do you want Jimmy Morrell to play second base? I said, Skip, I love second base. And that's how I became a second baseman, and Jimmy Morrell was gone the next day. He was hitting about 340. So that also is the lesson.
As you were playing, did you think of writing things down, or did things come to you that, or was this too far early in your baseball career that you would think about something like that?
I wrote a couple short stories in this period that got published in obscure journals, but I didn't write while I was playing baseball. And despite what my dear friend Bobby Grich says, I wasn't taking notes in the back of the bus. I was trying to figure out how to hit the slider. That's what I was trying to do. And reading Ted Williams' great book on hitting, going, I get it, but how do you do it? And, you know, if there's something people might enjoy this a little bit, just the daily grind of the game, which I try to talk about a lot, is it's a little different than when you think being a professional athlete is. Afternoon matinees started, well, this is why. A player lives in an apartment or a hotel room 9 months a year, and most of the job happens at night, so killing time in the day becomes a serious focus. Soap operas filled the void for some of the guys. There was the General Hospital faction and the rival As the World Turns gang. Locker room discussions could get heated. I was part of the third group. We were doing anything other than watching the soap operas our mothers watched. Movies were the solution. And so I started going to movies, because that'd get you from 1 to 3 in the afternoon, and then you'd take a cab, you had to be at the ballpark at 4. Plus there was usually better air conditioning in the movie theater than at the crummy hotel you're staying at. And then this little story is typical of the book, because later you'll see, when I'm writing the script, these stories start to enter the movie. In Little Rock, Arkansas, this is AA, by the way, Texas League, a heavy thunderstorm hit while we were playing cards at 3 in the morning. We dreamed the storm would last all night and the next day and cause the field to be flooded and the game to be rained out. In the Texas League, there were very few days without a scheduled game. The season was endless. We begged for days off, but they never came. Out of that desperation, we determined that while the tarp covering the infield had probably already been laid down by the ground crew in anticipation of this storm, that tarp could be removed. If it was, the field would flood and we'd have a night to ourselves. So 4 of us got in a cab and headed to the ballpark at 4 a.m., then convinced the frightened cabbie to wait for us while we climbed the fence of the ballpark as the rain poured down. We discovered what any college guy should have known, and at least 2 of us in the cab were college guys. There's a reason a ground crew has 20 men or a motor to remove the tarp. It's heavy as hell. We couldn't budget and had to abort our mission. We did manage to take the small tarp off the batter's box for reasons I can't fathom to this day, rendering that critical part of the diamond almost unplayable. Escaping the ballpark was harder than breaking in, however, and one of our star pitchers, whose name was Dizzy, cut his hand climbing back over the fence. The cabbie hadn't waited for us, and we were left to walk the 4 miles back to the hotel as the rain grew heavier. That night I went 0 for 4, standing in the mud at home plate, unable to gain footing. And Dizzy went on the disabled list for 2 months. He told Joe that he had cut his finger on a can of beer. He said a can of beer would have been okay. So anyway, obviously that becomes the scene of the movie.
You had a lot of stories, but the saddest part, I think, is it wasn't sad. It's not sad now that you had to walk away, but the fact that you were able to walk away instead of them taking the jersey away from you. And if you could talk a little bit about that, because it transitions into your writing career, I think, somewhat.
Yeah, I also talk about regrets.
Yeah. Well, we all have that. But I mean,
well, I saw a lot of guys who were the model for Crash Davis. They were consummate professionals. They were really, really, really good baseball players. I mean, there, but for the grace of God, goes a big leaguer. But for instance, in AAA in Rochester. Now, keep in mind, the only next step is the Baltimore Orioles. So we had a third baseman named Mike Ferraro. Again, he's not specifically like Crash, but his situation. He was the 4 years in a row when I was there, all internationally, AAA, all-star third baseman. But they wanted him to stay there. They didn't want him to come to the big leagues and sit on the bench behind Brooks. They wanted him, Brooks Robinson, they wanted him to stay there to be ready in case Brooks got hurt, he could step in and be ready. So he didn't get to the big leagues till he was 32 and over the hill. And there's a lot of those guys. And so Crash Davis became, first of all, I didn't want to become one of those guys.
yeah.
And I was 25, and when you're 25 and you've worked your way up to AAA, you think you're 80 years old. You really think, wow, is there any life after 25? Honestly, you think that. And so when I walked away, it was to start something new over. I went to graduate school in painting and sculpture of all things, but it still took 15 years to figure out how to make a living.
Then when did you start writing? How old were you?
Well, in college I started writing nonsense verse. I love Lewis Carroll and all that stuff. But then when I was in graduate school, I started writing these short stories that I would submit to magazines. And, I mean, it was, I mean, there may be writers here, if you got a rejection from the New Yorker that the guy had signed, that was like a major breakthrough. You framed that.
Yeah.
It wasn't just printed. The guy signed it, said, send more.
Yeah. Then that followed, you started writing for Screen, including Best of Times, which, I really enjoyed the movie, but I think it would have been better if you had actually directed that We talked a little bit about that. And I wanted to know about writing something on that large of scale, transitioning from smaller stuff to writing something that big.
It's a story, it's a script that has to make sense to actors and to financiers, you know. The best of times came from when friends here told me, did you see that Santa Barbara and San Marcos played alumni football game and 10,000 people came to the Playa Stadium. They don't get 10,000 to the high school games.
Yeah.
And it occurred to me that there was an idea there, that at 40, we're more intensely, not me for sure, but people are more intensely living their high school years than they were when they were 16.
Ah.
And because there's so many people whose life ended at high school, which I cannot fathom. You know, I was happy. I love Santa Barbara High, but I was happy to put that in my rearview mirror. And I still think it's a great high school. But wow, 10,000 people are watching a bunch of 40-year-old men try to settle an old score. And that was the genesis of the best of times. And I just moved it to Bakersfield and Taft.
Yeah. Well, it was casted brilliantly with Kurt Russell and Robin Williams playing the two foils. In terms of Bull Durham, how did it start happening for you as far as the screenplay?
Well, I'd written these two movies, Under Fire and The Best of Times, which neither one was financially successful, but they had some critical following. I mean, Pauline Kael was a champion of mine, and she didn't like anything, so people said, well, if Pauline Kael likes it, maybe we'll give her another chance. It was, one of them, Under Fire, was a big hit in Europe. And I was the second unit director on each of them, and that means you're out there shooting cars going left and cars going right, and in football I got to shoot more. Under Fire is a Nicaraguan revolution. I got to shoot a lot of street fighting, so I had what they call a reel that you could say, look, this is what I've done.
Okay.
And I had the great John Alcott, Kubrick's cinematographer, shot Under Fire, and he liked me and he said, when you're ready to direct, I'll shoot your first movie. And that's all in the book here. And I've got Kubrick's guy, and he had a heart attack. He died at 54, at Cannes actually. He was a genius, and so I thought I would write a script that about minor league baseball that they can't use an excuse not to hire me, that somebody else knows more about this than I do. When I was a story editor at Ed Pressman's, we had a script that was so much better than anything else. It was Platoon by Oliver Stone, but it was so clear that he had lived that movie, and we couldn't get it made. It got made after Ed lost the rights. It got made like 5 years later. But so I thought, well, I will go in and say I'm the director, and I managed to sell it. And we managed to set it up at a studio, and that's like a thriller chapter, because we had 30 days to get it off the ground, and we got it in the 29th day, the 23rd hour, the 59th minute, and 59th second.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, and it would never happen today. It's too corporate now, but it was personalities in those days.
Yeah, I want to talk about that in a sec, but I want to get back to the screenplay. It's brilliantly written. There's some gems in there. And one of my favorites was when Annie goes, "The world is made for people who aren't cursed with self-awareness." Where did that come from?
Well, I think we all have too much of it, and I see certain people who are oblivious in a way that I admire.
Yeah.
They can't be embarrassed. You can't criticize them. Sometimes the obliviousness is not a crutch or helpful, but is there a way to be above it or beyond it or outside it? And I don't know. I wanted to give Nuke a grace note to put him in perspective, because I never wanted to make fun of Nuke. I like Nuke. I think there's a dignity, especially in Tim's performance. You like him, and he makes a huge journey in the movie. I mean, he's teasing Crash at the end. He recognizes that the Annie thing is for now, not for next. And he, he's using cliches in the big leagues to show how sophisticated he's getting. And that's all in an hour and 45 minutes. So Nuke's on a journey. And Crash is the guys I told you about.
Yeah. But reading, next time you watch the movie, actually first you should read the book and then watch the movie. Because you can really pick out some things and understand it. But pay attention to his dialogue, and it's just such a wonderful dialogue. And you're capturing ball players who aren't considered literate, but you're making them so without seeming like you're trying to make them so. It's a true gift, I think.
Well, everybody has a chance to. We all hear the same dialogue, folks, in the grocery store, in the bar,
Yeah.
talking to a cop. It's all out there. You just kind of gotta listen to it, and then I don't make that much up. I mean, you reinvent, you shape, but I mean, somebody one time, 10 years ago, came out of Silicon Valley. Why don't you write a story about Silicon Valley with your characters? I said, I don't know how people talk in Silicon Valley, and I would be uncomfortable in Silicon Valley. That's not who I am. But you know, I mean, for all my Santa Barbara upbringing, I still feel more working class, and I know where I'm comfortable. I know where I'm uncomfortable, and I think you just have to write what you know is the oldest thing in the world.
Well, I think that shines through your working class, shines through in all your movies. Like, you know, White Men Can Jump and Cobb especially. I think that it's something that we all can understand, but we can all enjoy at the same time. Casting the movie, what a great cast. And I mean, you want them to read the book, but if you can share some nuggets about here.
Well,
Like Kevin Costner, he surprised me as far as his involvement in the movie.
Kevin's a really good actor.
Yeah.
I mean, we judge people. We should judge everybody, my work included, by the best work, and you know, not by the postman. And
Yeah.
you know, John Ford made 120 movies. We talk about 20 of them. Can you name one of the other 100? No. And he was a genius. So, you know, Hemingway was trying to get his novels destroyed that he didn't want published. Now they're published. So, look, Kevin I went to. I had a way to get to Kevin. He wasn't a superstar yet. He was about to be a star. And I heard he was a good athlete from people I believed, and I got the script to him, and which was not easy to do. And we had lunch, and he said, "I want to try out. I want to audition for you." I said, "You've already got the part." He said, "No, you played professional. I played high school." And he's from around here in Ventura. And,
Yeah.
went to Bueno High School, and I said, "Well, you have the part if you want." He said, "No, I want to go to the batting cage and try out."
Yeah.
So he ordered a row of little vodkas, and it's one of the only spirits I know crazy about. Threw them all down. We went out to the Sepulveda Boulevard and Ventura Boulevard batting cage arcade, where there's miniature golf and the noisy arcades, and we played catch. We each had a ball and a mitt in our trunk, and I have no idea why. Now with my son, wherever he is, we always have him, but we play catch, and people walking by him, they don't recognize him yet, because he's just
Yeah.
about to break. And then we get in the cage with a bunch of quarters, and he's got a beautiful stroke, right-handed, and then he says, "I can hit left-handed too," and I said, "This is unbelievable," because first of all, as a director, if you can hit left-handed and right-handed, it doesn't matter what the sun is. I can get him the glory lighting either way. Honest to God, it was fun. And then, even then, we had 30 days to mount the movie, or he had to go do another movie, Everybody's All-American, which his agents wanted him to do, and which was directed by another Santa Barbara High graduate, Taylor Hackford,
Actor, yeah.
from my class
Your
of
class,
63, yeah. So, at any rate, it's a long and wild story about how we pulled this off, but Tim was very hard to find, very hard to find. The Susan story is in here. I'll shorthand for you. There is something, let me read the list thing, because it's, Gotti, you know this part, if I can find it in Susan's,
135.
yeah, 135.
Yeah.
I'll just read a little bit and I'll tell it because it's quicker. It was quickly clear we were awash in good candidates for Annie. The actresses seemed to like the character on the page and were full of ideas about how to make her their own. The problem wasn't a lack of terrific actresses, but something known as the list. With a capital T and a capital L in this book. Every studio, network, or financing entity has one. The list consists of the names of actors or actresses who are acceptable for a lead role because they are either bankable on their own or, in some combination with other co-leads, are bankable enough. There are usually fewer than a dozen names on the list, and every studio has their own, although most of the names are common. The problem when you're trying to cast the leads in a movie is that the list keeps changing. Names drop on and off the list as films open big or flop, so an actor who might be acceptable last week isn't on the list this week. I got a call from Martha Luttrell, a big agent at ICM, who suggested Susan Sarandon for Annie. She wasn't on the list. But a director can't share that with an agent because that's betrayal of confidence with the studio. So, though I'd made a personal pledge that whatever else happened, I would be frank and honest with everyone I dealt with, I was forced to lie immediately in a way that was more ridiculous than telling this. There's another story. This was a real lie. I told Martha that I didn't think Susan Sarandon was right for the role. So I privately thought she was a great idea. It didn't matter. She wasn't on the list. What Susan did, she was living in Italy with her 2-year-old. She was with an Italian director at that time. And the agent called to say she's flying with her 2-year-old and her nanny from Italy to LA, and you have to see her because she's doing it on her own time. I said, okay, out of respect. And I told Kevin to be there, and so she comes in the room, looks like $1 million. She knew the lines. She didn't have the script. She'd already memorized the script. And she's just pushing him around and lighting up the room, and she's funny, and boom, 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 and she leaves. And Kevin and I looked, and one of the producers, and we looked at, well, that was great. What are we going to do? It was a Friday. It was 2 weeks before shooting. We still didn't have. And so she says, so we said, well, it's Friday, let's have a drink. And we had we're sitting around wondering, what do we do? And about an hour later, about 5 o'clock, Mike Medavoy, the head of Orion Studios, who now we have to deal with, called to say, I saw Susan Sarandon 2 weeks ago at an event. She looks great. Why don't we put her on the list? Well, I know he was lying because she was in Italy 2 weeks ago. And what happened was she went straight from the meeting to Orion Studio and started working her way up down the hallway, waving to all the fellas. She had a really nice dress on, looked like $1 million. And till she found Mike. Hey, Mike, how are you? Mike calls, put her on the list. She's hired the next day. In fact, she then flew right back to Italy. She was there for like 36 hours. And she was in this little town, San Felipe Circio or something. Yeah. And she's walking along the beach, and her neighbor comes running over and says, somebody's calling you from Los Angeles. And she called her agent. They said, you're hired, get on a plane to Durham. And she was in Durham the next day, and we were rehearsing. Wow. So it's a good story about not taking no for an answer, too.
Wow. Well, it seemed like all 3 actors were so invested in this project. And, that's not always the case. But, I mean, you had to go through a lot of shit, for lack of a better term, to get this movie made. And you got to read the book again to talk about this. But
well, the teaser is that after 2 weeks, the studio hated it so much that they were going to fire Tim Robbins and replace him with Anthony Michael Hall. And they thought Susan looked so bad. Hello? That they fired my director of photography in the middle of the day's shoot. Yeah. And I was next on the list to be fired. But I thought they wouldn't fire me because Kevin would back me. They said the movie wasn't funny, it wasn't sexy, wasn't romantic, and nobody would believe Susan Sarandon would ever go to bed with Tim Robbins. I'm the godfather of their firstborn, by the way.
That's why you should never listen to the studios.
Well, they're writing the check. You can't not listen.
Yeah,
you have to fight.
That's true. You have to fight. Yeah. Speaking of casting, not only your large cast was amazing, but you bring in the the clown prince of baseball, Max Patkin, who's just a wonderful entertainer. He's done like 4,000 shows throughout every minor league park. You brought in Robert Wool as the pitching coach, and then Trey Wilson as the skip. Rest his soul, he died far too young.
And he died the year after this movie.
Yeah, but it just seemed like you were a general manager and a manager of a baseball team, taking them through a playoff run, a grinding season. Like, you're trying to put all the pieces together. And not only you were the director, but you had a lot of producing roles. You were the writer. How were you able to put it, hold it all together?
Well, barely. If you read the book, barely
Yeah.
is the answer. Look, I talk a lot about this in the book, and the athletic model is huge to me. It's just not the sports cliches, but, I like working with actors, I like working with crews. I'm not crazy about the people wearing ties and suits, because I don't think they're very empathetic to what is involved. But I get along with actors. I mean, Cotty and I made a movie, Dark Blue, Cotty Chubb over here. I get along with all manner of actors, I think. Oh, no, there was one I didn't. It's the only movie ever, there was one. Well, yeah, I'll tell you later. Yeah, because I think, it's like a team. It's like, they're like athletes, actors are.
Yeah.
I mean, they're completely exposed out there. They're at your mercy. You could ruin their performance with bad editing. You could, they have to say and even though a film's crew is hierarchical and militaristic in a way, it doesn't have to be anything rigid about it. In other words, I always quote John Wooden, who said, he learned, you didn't handle players, you worked with players. A huge distinction, and I think about that with actors. Where directors start heading buddy with an actor. Wait, before you ever get to the head buddy, why don't you sit down and work it out? What is it? That isn't making sense? Well, is there another line, a different way to say that, or what? Listen, the buck stops on the directors. The actor doesn't get blamed if the movie fails, the director does. I've got plenty of those too. So, in that regard, it is, why do some managers and coaches, why do players love to play for them, and other ones they hate? Well, it's the same with directors. They all liked Robert Altman. I never met Robert Altman. There's others that they just are terrified of. And that's the coaching thing. Look, if a guy's going to shoot a free throw with the game on the line, and the other team ices it and calls timeout, do you think, what should you tell the player? You better make this, or we're gonna lose our job. No, you say, hey, have fun. It's a professional, it's a 6-pack of beer. Whatever.
Yeah.
You don't. Would you rather somebody be relaxed?
Yeah.
Or uptight? So with acting, it's the same, I think.
You work very well with them, but you also, I'm going to reveal a little bit of Robert Wool. He was kind of a wild card.
I wish I could find that page in here. Robert.
He played Arliss in that HBO series. He was also in your Ty Cobb movie too.
He was in Blaze as well.
Yeah.
Robert Wool is a comic, stand-up comic turned actor. He was in Good Morning Vietnam and a movie called Hollywood Nights. And it was an audition day on Bull Durham. We're late in the process. We're way behind casting. This was sent to me by Leonard recently. He had records of, I had 42 actors in one day to audition. 42. This is really bad planning.
Yeah.
And they're all lined up in the hallway. It was in LA at the Warner Brothers lot, the Columbia lot. And they're all getting restless, and I'm trying to give everybody 15 minutes. I like the small talk. I like to get to know. I mean, there's 42 people coming in, 2 Oscar winners. I'm feeling terrible. It's the day I found Tim Robbins, by the way. Anyway, and Robert finally comes in. I didn't know him. I reinvented his audition dialogue in the book the best I could.
Robert's the guy who's the candlesticks scene on the mountain.
141.
141?
Oh, thank you.
There's no index. I think we ran out of. So Robert comes in. I don't know this guy. He's a baseball lunatic, by the way. I mean, out of his mind. Roberts auditioned for Larry Hockett, the pitching coach and tandem running mate of Skip the manager, as best I can remember it, with apologies to Robert. Robert, he walks in the room. He doesn't walk in the room, he flies in the room, he's banging off the wall. Hey, great script, blah, blah, blah. You know, I think this guy's got to stay connected to Skip in case Skip gets called up, because then he Skip's guy in the show, am I right? And I want to ask, what do you think of Tim Carver? Even though he's not a pitching coach, of course he's a TV announcer, but he knows pitching coaches, what I'm saying, because he caught Gibson and all that. But do you think he talks too much? Because some people love him, some hate him because he talks so much. But he knows what he's saying, so he says it too much. But maybe I wonder, what's your call? By the way, is William Benix the worst movie baseball player ever? Is Babe Ruth, are you kidding me? 42-year-old guy playing an orphan. What a joke. But Tony Perkins catching a fly ball is a disgrace. And he's banging the drum slowly about baseball or about dying. What do you think? Well, it went on. And I don't remember, back to this book, I don't remember getting to a line reading. I don't remember saying anything other than, I think Tim McCarver talks too much. Robert just finally finished talking after bouncing off the walls, and he left. Bonnie Timmerman, the casting director, apologized for bringing him in. I said I wanted to hire him. Now keep in mind, first-time directors, so they're all trying to make sure you don't make stupid first-time directing mistakes. She said that was probably the worst audition she'd ever seen. I agreed, but I still wanted to hire him. I said that I couldn't teach what he did, but I thought I could coach it, or put a lid on it, or steer it in a direction that made the manager pitching coach team a kind of vaudeville act. His non-audition had me already rethinking the part. Plus, Robert knew baseball, he got the job. So,
he was a fine addition. I know we want to get some books signed, so we'll start wrapping this up. 35 years it's lasted and it's still endured. Nobody expects that to happen. It's considered by many, myself included, the greatest sports movie ever. What do you think about that as far as how it's endured?
I'm sort of amazed, and I'll end this by reading the first thing in the book.
Yeah. Because
it sort of answers that. Why the introduction is why write a movie about why write a book about a movie made that long ago? I'll just read you two paragraphs of the 4 pages. Not long ago, I was in Durham, North Carolina to honor the 30th anniversary of the movie Bull Durham. As writer and director of the film, I was to be trotted around the new ballpark that is now the home of the AAA Durham Bulls. Every night I had a cocktail at the beautiful hotel bar, the Bull Durham Bar, in fact, named for the movie. I was amazed to find that many locals credited the turnaround of the city to the opening of the movie in 1988. It's true that when I scouted Durham, even before I wrote the film script, it was boarded up and in trouble. Its longtime economic engine, Big Tobacco, had ended, and there seemed to be nothing to replace it. The desperate look and feel of this southern town with its ancient crumbling ballpark and shuttered businesses suggested the perfect background in which to set a story in the minor leagues where the young athletes' dreams similarly crumble and are boarded up. Now I go through other things about Michelangelo being interfered with by Pope Julius II. Sistine Chapel came up pretty good. Francis Ford Coppola being driven mad by Robert Evans. Godfather's a masterpiece. Anyway, the end of it. So why all these years later write a book about the making of this particular movie? I don't actually think about the movie much, but there are regular requests for interviews, the occasional film class to teach, a retrospective, that sort of thing. And now and then an article about the movie is published and there are inevitably errors. No, Harrison Ford was not offered the part of Crash, and Cher was not given the script to play Annie. Where does this stuff come from? Maybe I can set the record straight for anyone who cares. Maybe I can share with young film directors the problems a first-time director will almost certainly encounter. Or maybe I can just forget the whole thing and continue to concentrate on new work in front of me, which is what I care about most these days. I've frequently been asked to write about the movie and have always demurred. But then something happened that caused me to reconsider. In Durham, for that 30th anniversary bash, I did a Q&A with the fans in the ballpark prior to the game. And a married couple raised their hands with more than a question. They said they had moved to Durham because of the movie, and they wanted to meet me and take a photo with their 2 young sons. I was happy to oblige. As I posed with his family of 4, I asked the names of the boys. Tell the man, the mother counseled. The 10-year-old smiled and said, I'm Crash. I looked at the younger brother and said, I'm afraid to ask. The boy looked up and said, yep, I'm Nuke. That's why I'm writing this book.
Let's sign some books. So why don't we line up right down the center here? We're going to line up outside to the left of the door. So we'll start here and make our way out.